Hey everyone, I'm Jared Klinkowize from the Question School of Business, Content Trading, and Accounting, and my project is a performance-enhancing drug use for professional athletes. Is it actually profitable? And I was advised by Greg Stoller, also from the Question School of Business. So first, what are performance-enhancing drugs, also known as PEDs? Steroids are generally taken by professional athletes illicitly and illegally in order to improve their performance. PEDs can help enlarge muscles and boost energy levels and also improve recovery, not just from injury, but also from workout to workout. However, there are also very numerous negative health impacts for steroids. That includes kidney and liver damage, enlarged heart, and increased blood pressure. Obviously, very dangerous and bad side effects to consider down the line. So my project takes a different twist to current research and literature out there about steroids and PEDs. Most of the current research out there is really a morality debate of how the legacy of certain athletes should be viewed after they've been caught taking steroids. But my project kind of takes a new swing on this and kind of considers profit as a potential motivation for taking PEDs, which hasn't really been thought of before in the past. And in order to do this, I really compiled different sports journals and different sports broadcasting publications, but I couldn't have done this project and made as much headway without a lot of the expert and industry interviews that I conducted. This ranged from different sports writers, broadcasters, scouts, agents, and lawyers within the industry. Where this knowledge was really critical is a lot of these contracts and these endorsement agreements and some of these financial avenues for athletes, these aren't published publicly. So I can't just go look up somewhere who's this player's contract, how does this contract work. I have to get these expert interviews in order to find out some of these things. So first, which athletes are the ones that are most likely to take PEDs? I kind of found that it wasn't really the star players, the big names. It was kind of the athletes that are on the cusp or on the borderline of either A, for just making the major leagues or professional level, or the borderline professional player trying to make that next step into being a more average player. And also further diving into the financials, you see this influence. The average minor league player makes $50,000, while even the minimum MLB player makes $615,000. And even taking that next step to average pay is a $5 million a year pay. So you see the significance between those levels and where an athlete could be motivated to take that step and use steroids. So the first cost I'm going to look into is the cost of doing the steroids themselves. A typical steroid cycle is 12 weeks, which is 12 weeks of using PEDs and then 12 weeks of not using the PED. So that could either be one cycle or two cycles a year, depending on what the athlete decides to do. And these, the drugs themselves, they start at $1,500 a cycle, around a rough estimate. But usually these athletes will also hire some sort of trainer or physician or some sort of outside consultant so they can maximize the use of the PED and really get the most out of it in terms of improving their performance. And that ranges from usually $100 to $200 an hour on a scale. And I estimated based on how often they would use this type of outside help. So the average cost of a cycle to be $7,500 to $25,000. And if they would take a second cycle within that year, obviously you would just double those costs. However, those costs are pretty small in terms of some of the other costs to consider. When an athlete is suspended for PEDs, they forfeit all of the pay for the games that they are suspended for, meaning they lose their salary on a prorated basis for the games that they missed or they're not eligible to play because of suspension. Also, athletes also run the risk of being cut from endorsements in terms of what are called morality clauses. To your right, you see an example of a typical morality clause for a typical endorsement contract. You could see there's a lot of leeway for the brand to really decide what they deem to offend someone as a part of their contract, so they can kind of clip an athlete pretty easily. There also are clawback provisions within contracts, but these ones are less likely to be taken up because in a clawback you have to prove that the athlete actually damaged the brand and the brand lost money, which in any endorsement usually never happens. So it's a risk, but not really something that you actually see. Now moving on to some of the benefits, obviously increased salary within the years that they're playing as they're performing at a higher level, and also improves career longevity. Obviously, if you're recovering longer, you're making millions of dollars for a longer period than you wouldn't have. And also new sponsorship avenues that are available that weren't available to you previously at their old level of performance. And speaking to some of these brand managers, they look for athletes who are performing at a high level and that are attractive to fans. And then also improved exit opportunities after retirement. That's Alex Rodriguez and Rodney Harrison, two of the players that I looked at. And after their career, they were able to land lucrative multi-million-dollar media jobs based on some of their performance and their notoriety when they were playing. So to kind of take a brief look at a specific case to kind of see the numbers and the mechanics of how this all works out. So taking the most notable case probably I looked at, Alex Rodriguez. He was suspended for an entire season, 162 games, and he forfeited $25 million in salary. However, over the course of his career, he made $455 million in career earnings as an estimated net worth of $350 million to $400 million. And also you see, as I spoke about a little bit before, his current role as a lead analyst he's still in the business. He's still an influential name and someone that fans take a lot into consideration and care a lot about. And he's also been able to pivot some of these investments as a marketing mogul as part of the A-Rod Corp, which he uses to really endorse brands and invest behind brands in a venture capital role. Before I jump quickly to my conclusion, just a brief disclaimer that for this project, I'm not trying to say that you should take PEDs. It's just a hypothetical exercise that they could or could not be profitable. Obviously, looking at the A-Rod case and some of the other cases, it's clear that these athletes were able to profit and they were able to increase not just their earnings now, but also their earnings later in the future by taking PEDs and doing this thing that's supposed to be legal and supposed to be bad for you. So with that in the future, leagues could kind of look at more innovative punishments, more innovative suspensions, and really just improve contract terms to kind of dissuade this negative thing that we know is wrong, but yet there's such an incentive for them to do it. So thank you. Questions?
I'm just curious about if you had any surprises or along the way or things that you learned along the way that you weren't expecting.
I would say, like, I kind of touched a little bit on it before. Most of the cases aren't like when you see like bigger name players, especially today, like Fernando Tatis, like DeAndre Hopkins, like those are the star players like who like have tested positive for PEDs recently. Those are the ones that like you see in the press because those are the big time players. But it's not really that. It's mostly the players, like I spoke about before, who are on that like borderline level where you see the most influence and the most desire to take PEDs, as you can tell by some of the change in numbers for the salary they could be making.
Did you find any examples that counter the A-Rod example of like people whose lives were ruined and their careers were ruined by taking drugs, or was it just a net positive for all the players?
The most like that would probably be Lance Armstrong. His worth went from about 150 million to 75 million, but obviously like he lost a significant amount of money, the most out of anyone that I looked at. But at the end of the day, like, would he have gotten to 75 million, 50 million if he hadn't done it in the first place? Who's to know? But that would be the one where like there was the most significant loss.
What about other kinds of loss? For example, not being able to have children, not being able to emotionally regulate oneself, maybe like cardiac illnesses, especially with the cases that you looked into, like Alex Rodriguez?
That's not really, I guess I kind of took a financial lens, so you can't really quantify like how much does cardiac issues, like how much does that cost you? So that's not really like a quantifiable thing, I guess. But obviously, yeah, that's something that could be considered in a future project, maybe linking, I guess, those types of things. But since it's not really a pure cost number, that wasn't really something that I considered.
Did you only look at baseball for your analysis, and if so, why?
I also considered the NFL, but those are the two sports where you usually see the most PED usage and the most suspensions given out. Like, you don't really see as much in the NBA, for example, as a professional sport where players get suspended.
You think there's any reason for the differences across the major sports?
I would say most so, definitely for football, because of how violent the sport is. That a lot of the cases I looked at for football specifically were players who were coming back from long-term injury or who had like an injury issue in the past that they were like that was nagging them and bothering them, obviously due to the nature of football itself. So I would say that's probably why you see a lot of NFL players using PEDs.
I'm just curious. So, like, I know you're saying the highest usage of steroids was like more people like in the middle who are trying to get to like the major leagues. So I was wondering, what is there like evidence that like taking steroids actually would like help your like performance in that way? Like, would it move you up that high? Like, because I'm just thinking like a lot of like technique based like sports. Like, is steroid usage even that beneficial?
Well, it's in terms of not just the technique, but the strength. And these athletes professionally are operating at like the highest level. So if you're close or on that cusp and where you're lacking is physically, then you find something to bridge the gap. And for a lot of these athletes, it is the steroids because it allows them to work out harder, allows for them to work out better, and just to really improve physically to a level they wouldn't be able to if they didn't take the drug.
So super interesting in terms of your particular way of reframing even the question around these things, but ultimately it seems that you're coming to the same conclusions as much of the moral kind of take on this just through a different avenue and still saying we need to just think about these issues within that. One of the things I'm wondering about that is where does that put you in terms of your understanding of economic decision making of the very people that you're talking about? So you're doing this analysis and looking over the long term, like, look, it worked out for them in terms of profitability. But part of the assumption there, right, is that they are calculating this from the get-go. They're calculating the sort of risk benefit, analysis there. Is that true? Were you able to figure that out? Like, how are the particular individuals who are then subjecting themselves to this doing the same sorts of economic calculations that you're doing in hindsight?
I guess for them in that moment, you have to consider what the next best option is for you in your career. Like if you're an athlete and you're not going to make it to the pros, like what's next for you? Because especially in the minor leagues, especially for baseball, these players they might not go to college. They might not do some of the things that like I would do as a student, or they kind of give those opportunities away to pursue a professional career. So they might not have the lucrative out if it doesn't work out for them. So they kind of are in a position where if I don't do this, I might lose the $50,000 a year job that I have, or like you're talking like some of these amounts are generational amounts of money. If you can make $5 million a year, like even once, even twice, like you're setting yourself up and your family up for the rest of your life. So imagine if you're sitting in your shoes, in that person's shoes, like if I don't do this, I might not be able to have that potential earning. And that's kind of where, if I were them, I'm not them, but if I were them, that's probably the lens that I would be considering at.